here's a little picture of the model we're going to look at in just a minute, and let me get started. And I hope what we're going to show you is really something seriously different, a different way to look at project finance modeling that matches and corresponds to the changes that have been occurring in the structuring of debt and the way project financing is structured. So just a couple of, okay. Sorry about this. I'm gonna move this thing up. Here's this method I'm talking about. We call it, we don't even know what to name it really properly. It's all built around a user-defined function. That's like if you create your own little sum function in Excel, or we've created an interpolate function. It's creating a function, and when you create a sum function, everybody knows that you don't have to press a copy and paste button for the sum function to work. That's basic. So when I say UDF, that's what it is. And here is what we hope to really have done. You know, the pain points, the problems in project finance are not making a timeline. They're not adding up a waterfall. They're not kind of structuring inputs nicely. They're not computing a commitment fee. The problems are related to structuring the debt, and that structuring the debt is what project finance is absolutely all about. That's what makes project such a cool thing. That's what makes project finance different than corporate finance. You have some people who are putting 90% or 80% debt into your project. They're telling you about the risk. They're telling you, is this a go or no go? And they're structuring the size of the debt and the manner in which you repay the debt in more and more complicated ways. And we hopefully have a good mathematical solution to some of these problems. Now, this UDF method, we've named it parallel model. We'll explain why also. I want to show you that it's really totally flexible, and you can, if you have a solar project, then you might size the debt with P50 and a 1.35 DSCR or P90 and a 1.2 time DSCR or P99 1 time DSCR, or a debt to capital with 80% debt, and then you do the sculpting. There are all different ways to size the debt, and trying to write a model that does that in a smooth, beautiful kind of way can be really difficult. So we're going to show you how you can have the flexibility to really look at the debt sizing, and then we'll show you how how you can immediately check all of your work. You have a tool, that's where the parallel model comes in, to check all your work. And we'll show you also that this method works quickly. It's a faster method than something like a copy and paste. And now the big change, because Hetty is here and she's worked on this immensely with me, we've made it hopefully easy to use. You know, so here, just very quickly, if you have a whole lot of debt issues and you sculpt the debt issues, and maybe I made a little example, maybe 52 debt issues, one has a high interest rate, one has a low interest rate. That's not so easy. You can't just say 50% of the debt service comes from one and 50% comes from the other. No, you can't do that, because the debt service on the higher interest rate will be more than the other one. And you have to come up with ways to optimize the debt. And when you have one debt issue that's longer than the other, it gets messy. And if you might have to have that issue be a flexible debt issue. If the debt to capital is fixed and somebody gives you a DSCR, how do we put all that together? You can, sculpting does not mean that the DSCR is fixed. The DSCR can change in all sorts of different ways. And the DSCR can, the sculpting process itself vary almost all the time, has a circular reference because taxes can be taken away from the CFADS, or because you have some fees on a letter of credit for a debt service reserve account. I don't know if I'm going through these things if they sound esoteric, don't worry about them. But just to give you a flavor, it's complicated. You can solve all these things with a little bit of math, no brute force. You can really develop a few different mathematical equations and get these things. And we've incorporated all of this into this UDF. So in addition to showing how that works, we're going to show you how you can really think differently about what you're doing when you're making a model. Bankers have kind of two groups. One who structures the debt, comes up with negotiates the repayment pattern, negotiates the size of the debt. Another very important group and related who does the credit analysis. Is this, what sort of rating are we going to give this a loan? What's the downside risks? And the investors kind of have to do both. And how do we incorporate, both the sizing of the debt, the structuring, and the risk analysis? And a lot of times when I made models for so many years, I didn't realize, am I doing risk analysis, structuring? My head was almost turning around. I didn't know. Once we show you this model, we're going to show you that I have problems. I was just on a trip. I always put the wrong dates in my trip. I have to put my credit card in and all that kind of stuff, or whatever. Implementing this model, I hope, is easier than buying an airplane ticket online. Eddie maybe has a much better example than this. And here's what I really want you to do. I know Kenny has been, Kenny Whitlaw has been an advocate of something that's incredibly important, and that's coming up with standard and well-structured models, and that's very good. But I want to go a step further. That just being overly structured and bureaucratic, you don't want to do that. You want to also be creative. You also want to make effective presentations, interactive kind of presentations. So in a meeting, you can kind of show off and you can make people realize that the modeling is really something. Doing that, it's really, I don't know what to say. Cool, how's that? Okay, finally, please don't think of any of this. Don't think of any of this as some sort of replacement for Excel, some sort of replacement for what you're doing. I hope you see that the methodology we're going to give to you is something that will allow you to go to the next level. You'll be able to change things. You'll be able to look at things differently. You'll be able to totally control what we're doing. It's all built all around Excel. So just that's a little introduction. I want to talk about three people. Hetty, I've already talked about her. She's really, everything that I'm talking about has come from her. We have regular conversations, sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, about how we should set things up, how we should make it user-friendly, what people want in the real world, what the real world kind of problems are, and how we can solve these things. So please, and she's on the call, and can you say hello, Hetty, please? Uh-oh. Well, okay.
No, that's fine. So hi, everyone. Thanks, Ed, for the introduction. I'm also excited, like everyone else, and I'm listening to you attentively.
Oh, no, don't. She's really the main driver. And then we've got Mike here. Mike, are you there?
Yep. Hello.
Hi, Mike. And Mike's really amazing in VBA. He says, he looks at my programs and says, oh, what are you doing? And he's come up with extremely valuable suggestions on making this thing really much more efficient. And Kenny's not here, but I think people know who Kenny is. What I like about him, when Hetty introduced me to him, he wants to be innovative. He wants to do something different. That's from the first time we met him. Now, the basic idea, I don't want to repeat too much. So there are no buttons here, faster time, separating risk and structuring. This will allow you, instead of a copy-paste method where you'd have to write your copy-paste, put a goal seek around it, and then do a goal seek, copy-paste, goal seek, the data tables, everything's back to Excel without any circular reference. Really, the whole thing came from circular reference. It allows you to, hopefully we'll show you that in just a minute, to do sensitivity analysis in meetings. So I've already talked about sculpting. It allows you to eliminate wasted space in models for extra unused spaces for dead in template models, spares. It allows some auditing. And if you think you're really good, maybe you think you're really good, but then you're like me. You write a model and the copy and paste just chunks along because it's a really big model. It's got to copy it. The model's got to compute. It takes a little time to compute, a few seconds, and then it's got to copy it again. The whole model's got to compute. It chunks along. If you can't change your model and have the bankers say, I want to do a structuring, no, I want to do a risk analysis, I want to put a P99 in to get my debt size, but then I want to get the after that, I want to get the IRR from the P50 case. I want to do that fast. I talked about goal seeks. If you really are having pain, which I would certainly have when you're trying to do this advanced sculpting, if you give your model and it has a button, and even though I've been modeling for so many years, when I get a model with a button, I'm afraid to press the stupid little button. If we want to be able to change from debt to capital to DSCR and not have to almost rewrite the model in different pages, if you want to be able to check your model and not just have auditors check like the spelling or something, then you should continue, okay? Then you should continue. And let's show you what I'm really talking about. So in preparation for this session, and while I was kind of working with some banks, and the first question the bankers asked, make a model so I can do a debt sizing, and we'll talk about what this debt sizing, and at the same time put in something like a downside case. So maybe I want to put in a P50 case, a P99 case, a debt to capital case. I want to size the debt, but then at the same time, oh yes, exactly, just about the same time I want to do some risk analysis. So let me try to, well, perhaps I'll explain it like this. Hetty has told me, oh God, your inputs stink. She says, you've got to put input C and input S, and I totally agree. So I put a simple kind of debt structuring some debt structuring and a P90 case, a P99 case, a debt to capital case. We put some different timing in. We put some different statistics to standard deviations to come up with these different cash flow patterns. And then we've also put different debt issues in. And I just made some scenarios up where, okay, this is in terms of periods, so semi-annual periods. We've got different tenors for the different debt issues, different percentages in for each issue, different fees, different interest rates, and the interest rates would be in input S. So we've got the different patterns of cash flow. And the first thing we'll do then is we'll work through some debt sizing. So here is our cash flow. Now, I've been told, I kind of practiced this on some people, not Eddie, she didn't say this, but other people, get your colors right. This doesn't look like a banker presentation. They're going to hate you for this. I'm sorry about that. The bottom line is, as an old banker, the only thing I care about is cash flow, the tail, the DSCR, and how we're going to capture some of the dividends with a cash sweep, and how risky the DSCR, everything for me comes in one graph. Every other graph, or a graph where you don't show the tail, is just you don't have a picture of what the risks really are. Okay, so now let's say instead of sizing the debt, in this case, I sized the debt with 80% debt to capital, and I backed into the DSCR, and there's a mathematical method that's pretty easy to use. I use a LLCR formula to back into this and get a DSCR 1.2. Okay, and by the way, in this scenario, you can see that the aggregate DSCR is the 1.22 in aggregate, but there are different debt tenures. In US, you say tenors, 10 years, whatever. And we've got this one being a little shorter, this is a little longer, and then the very last one, I don't know what to name this, a flexible debt issue or a capturing debt issue. So the debt service on this issue gets the remainder, and we have to make sure that each of these debt issues gives you the percentage you input, the percentage of the overall debt, the percentage of the 80% debt. So that's the way it works. Just doing this and setting up a model to do this, Hetty and I and Mike, we worked through simple examples with no circular reference to demonstrate the mathematics of coming up with this. But then we go to the next step and we say, okay, well, let's, instead of doing this with debt to capital, I put another scenario. This time, you notice I made them all have the same tenor. And this time we put in a target DSCR of 1.3, and we put a P99 debt service in, and we come up with this. And you notice there was no button to press. There was no copy and paste, even though there's a whole lot of circularity here. There was nothing to press. Or we could go to a P90. Okay, and again, now that little window, that's an optional window. It shows you that you're going around and recomputing the cash flow, recomputing all the interest rates, getting everything set up. And this time we had a 1.2 times DSCR, and it gave us a 73. And what the bank really would do is they would take the lowest. And we could do one more, P99. Okay, so far, and this is where Mike came in. Really, you can see the first times we did this, it kind of clunked along a little bit, but we're doing all of this, no buttons, just being able to show you what the different debt is. And I can't remember what the lowest is. Let's say this is the lowest. And then you can take this debt and move it over here and put the base case back in and see what the IRR from this level of debt is. And if we use the base case assumptions, even though this was 1.0 at a P99, this is 1.23, and we put the PLCR and LLCR, and then you can do a downside case. And you notice that this time, here's the big deal. There was no little picture coming around. There's no recomputing of all the complicated stuff here. This blue level of debt is the aggregate level of debt. Maybe I'll go back and put the debt to capital back in. Okay, I'll put this different method of the debt, and then we'll go back to the base case, and we start with the same sort of IRRs. And I don't know, maybe we'll show you a little bit later. Maybe you could do all of this with a model and a copy and paste and everything else. That's totally fine. But then I go even further. I go a little crazy and I say, okay, well, what happens if we put a cash sweep in here and we put the tenor earlier? And I'm hoping to show you, or what happens if we put a covenant in. This covenant, there wasn't enough room to do anything with this covenant in the low case. And even, this is going to be cool, I hope. What happens if we put some Monte Carlo, and then if we press F9, we can even take this debt size and we can even start putting this kind of stuff into the model. And I've got to convince you that it's not that hard to do. And you could do 1,000 scenarios and come up with probabilities of default and do things really, hopefully, in a different way. Let me take I'll put some, I'll do it with mean reversion. Okay, so that's the kind of style. Now I've got to explain that it's not just some black box. I've got to show you a little bit what you really, really can do with this. Okay, if you're going to have the debt to capital constant, now I'm going to switch the cash flow. And I'm going to put a little bit, now each time, you notice that each time I'm changing something related to the structuring of the debt. Okay, this time we're sculpting based on an increasing cash flow, and we're sculpting the different debt issues. And if we, I'm going to put a little bit of a higher cash flow case, so you get a little bit higher IRR. Maybe, but a higher equity IRR. That's with debt to capital at 80%, but we get a 1.46 DSCR. The bank might have said, oh, I'm good with 1.2 times DSCR, and then a more complicated and more interesting way to sculpt the debt is to notice that there are a couple of more iterations this time. The model is doing some mathematics and going through a goal-seek process. And this time, the DSCR gets to be 1.2 up here, and the DSCR is higher here. And when the DSCR is higher here, that allows dividends, and that allows you to increase the IRR that you can see over here. But then you can say, oh, what happens in a downside case? Oh, we got a little problem there. What happens? Should we put our cash flow sweep in? What happens if we have some of that volatility? Those are the kinds of things you can do. Now, please again, oh, nobody's asking any questions. But there are some chats here. I don't know what happened with the chats. Oh, that's when everybody just said hello. Okay, and you're from all over. That's fantastic. Okay, here's the next question. So the question is, okay, maybe that's just a little gimmick. Maybe you set this whole thing up so it's kind of fake, and maybe you cheated and all this stuff. So let me just give you a tiny, tiny little bit of background. Here's what happened. I teach some classes a long time before, and most of you were born. And when circle references started to come about, people knew there was this iteration button. It was a disaster. I hope people, it's just surprising to me that some people still use this. I've heard some people say they're dereffing a model, a new verb, dereffing. That means when you get all these references from the iteration button, you make some macro to take them out and you're all proud of yourself. Oh, okay. Somebody asked, no, but I hate those stupid buttons. Can't we do this whole thing without buttons, without the iteration? And then we tried a goal seek. We said, oh, let's make a user-defined function. So instead of doing a goal seek manually, we can say, let's compute the price of the PPA price or something automatically. So we put a different DSCR, it comes out. You don't have to press a button. You don't have to do a goal seek. And that can be done. That can be done. And then we said, oh, okay, but you got to put the equations in. And then we figured out, you can solve the circular reference with a UDF, with an equation. I promised not to really do this. I didn't want to get into the technical aspects, but you're right. In this case, we're just solving for fees. You write a little equation for fees, and you call it a function. That's a user-defined function. And then you need to read in the variables. When you read in the variables, you work through what has caused the circular reference itself. Now, that's why this thing can be faster than copy and paste, because you're isolating only on the equations that create the circular reference, not your thousands of equations for EBITDA, your hundreds of graphs, your all of the other things that can slow you down a little bit. Only the Excel stuff. And then it's much, much like a do while. It's kind of the same thing you do with a copy paste. Okay, but you have to read in the variables, and we discovered, okay, you can do that. And the first time we said, okay, oh, that's great. We figured out a way to do it. And then we tried to put it in the models, and it got messy. And that's when Hedy started saying, oh, no, you've got to make it so you've got to do two things. You've got to make it so it's easy to use. You've got to make it so people can see what's going on, so it's not some black box. And you've got to make it so it can be, so it matches here a copy paste. I couldn't think of how to show this. I've got two engines, one copy paste, one UDF. These have got equal. It's kind of like you've got two ways to run the model and test it. And two ways are a lot better than one. So we made all these little reports you can use, but they're optional reports. And I'll show you just a little bit of this now in practice. And at the end of the day, it's taken a long time. Hedy can tell me how long we've been working on this stuff. And I keep on saying this. I've said it we're finally there. We're just about there. We're just about there. By the way, we're not some startup company with some funding or anything else. We're just a group of crazy people who kind of are interested in this stuff. We go to Excel parties, Not really. There's no such thing. Okay.
By the way, Ed, two questions have come in.
Great.
If you want, I can read them out loud to you. The first one is just about the Excel file, whether that's something that you could share with everybody.
Yes.
From Mohammed. And then the other question is from Abdullah. Hi, Ed. Will UDF functions work on client computers without newer Excel versions?
The first question I answered, and we'll talk about what we want to do. We have we still have to eat, so we'll talk about how we'd really like to move on. And basically I'm not sure the client versions, some people, basically, here's really what we're doing. If you had a fixed debt in your model, if all the debt was fixed, there are no circular reference problems, there's nothing else. It's kind of like this. You're here. No, when I'm running the changes here, we've got to go through all sorts of complicated things when I'm running it here. No, and I think they would, because it's just a sum function. It's just a function you're creating. Now, here's what Hetty has kind of suggested, so I'm going to do it here. And she said, oh, God, we've got model auditors. It's a big business. It's a really important business. If the model auditors, they're never going to accept this. Oh, no, they're never going to accept this. Well, here's what you do. Here's the in the model, and that was a really good question about this. There's a structuring model, and we go through the kind of, this is a matter of style, but a little bit of capital expenditure and cash flow, and then I put a summary, sources and uses, and we have interest during construction fees and commitment fees and a debt service reserve account. And this is what causes the first circular reference, not the last, that's for sure, just the first related to funding, and that's the one we'll show you a little bit about. Okay, and then we can put in the period by period funding needs with all the fees, IDC and all this, and whether you like pro rata or equity up front or some mixture that Eddie worked out. And then we have issue by issue where you go through and work through the interest during construction and debt. So this is the real skeleton of a model with multiple debt issues. Of course, there could be thousands of equations for the CapEx and everything else. Now, there's another of the big innovation. Sometimes we want to turn this thing off because there are some equations here. And when we turn the UDF off now, no matter what happens, actually this might be a mess. It's no longer there, and we're back to the old model. And if we run a copy and paste, just a minute. That's because I already have some. Oh shoot! I should have changed something. How about this? Let me change the debt to capital to 75%. Okay, I hope that's gonna work here, and watch me mess up. And then I've got some differences. So we run our standard kind of copy and paste, and then and you notice that you can see the fixed numbers from your classic copy and paste. Nothing wrong with copy and paste. Well, there is, but whatever. And then we run it with our UDF, and now our UDF computes the amount of the debt, and we get exactly the same numbers. I don't know if I really showed it to you, but you can run it either with this UDF or without it. And then we've got kind of parameters for doing all of our risk analysis, and then we've got a little cash flow waterfall with our cash sweep, and you can look through that. And finally, this is the real thing. This is what I call, buying our airplane ticket. We go in these green numbers. We take these from the model itself, and we decide what kind of debt sizing we're going to use. And we have all sorts of very real world kind of problems. Maybe the debt, the repayment of the debt can't be less than 0, and so forth. And then we put just a few parameters, the the interest rate, the percentage of the debt, the tenor of the debt. We put that in for all the different periods now, when different debt issues. Now we can, just a minute, where do I, oh, I've got a couple of hidden lines. We can add more parameters. We've got the DSRA built in. We've got all sorts of tax parameters built in that we worked for years on, all sorts of different working capital, LC options, and Kenny was really, he was hard. He was mean. He made us work with a really big model to see whether it could handle a shareholder loan, LC for equity that's committed with pro rata, standby debt. We've worked through VAT facilities, all of these kind of things. They're in there, okay? Maybe, and somebody's going to say, oh, I have a special thing. No, it's not going to be work for my very special case because I'm so unique. And that's fine. It won't. We have to modify it. And we have to make it easy to modify. Now, if you notice up here, this is where we've never had this before. You notice that there are these little names. These are variable names in this big model that does all the mathematics behind the sculpting, sizing, taxes, funding, options. These are variables that are read into a program that basically does things. Now, when there are really two things you need when you're going to do this. You need this page at the end of your model. And somebody might say, oh, I don't like that page at the end of my model. Oh, okay, well, you need that page, and it's just linking things. People can do so much these days. I don't think going, and this has a variable DSCR, I don't think going and putting an equal sign and going back to either the inputs or the model to find out what the interest rate is, what the periodic commitment fee is, what the upfront fee is, finding out where these things are, is that big a deal, okay? Eddie's a lot better at this than me, but she can do it fairly quickly, okay? And then you got the outputs. And when look at this. This is all the output. This is Mike's innovation. He said, keep the output really small because the thing that's slowing you down is having too big reports. So right now it's a mystery. We come up with the repayment and the debt size and the weighted average interest rate, and those are the things we need from this big thing that does all these calculations. No big deal, okay? But I'm not satisfied with that because I want to see some details. Okay, I want to see that it's really working. I want to be able to have this look just like Excel. And to make it look just like Excel, I press a little number 1, and then we're running it. You notice that now it's running it, and if you really looked at it carefully, it took a tiny little bit more time. And then you get some output. Well, the output doesn't look very good, so we're gonna reformat it a little bit, and and you can. This is just a simple little macro. This isn't really part of the thing, and we can see our funding and our fees and where we're getting the money, and we have a set of checks. And we can see how many iterations we have to go around to make all our calculations. But that's just one report. Maybe I want to see exactly what happened to the taxes. How are the taxes all computed? So then we press another button, and there's another report down here, and it looks a little bit messy, so we better do our little formatting again. And we can take a whole lot of reports. I don't know how many more of these reports to really go through, but I call it drilling down. you can say exactly how did you now compute your taxes and do these taxes and the CFADS match exactly what we have in the model. And that's kind of our first step. We'll get your model, everything's there. We put this thing in your model and we make sure the CFADS corresponds to what you have. We make sure the funding needs correspond, and then we can get really complicated with, well, not too complicated, but how do we put all of our debt repayments in? So I'm just showing you one more model so everything can be verified. When Eddie says you can use this to verify your model to make sure you now have two things in your model. You have the way you did the model, you have this model. If they correspond, you could have made the same mistake twice. You could have put an input wrong or something like that, of course. But the equations, it's probably a really pretty good way to check your work. And you're different than me. I make mistakes. I'm an old man. I always make mistakes. I rush around. And so this very often, in fact, when I made this example, I made like about 10 mistakes where I put the wrong interest rate in debt issue 1 or debt issue 2. And I thought, oh, geez, I made a mistake in that UDF. No, it wasn't in the UDF. It was in the other one. And finally, so let's say you have a model. Let's say you have a template model that you're using. And you want to use the template model how you've used it all the time anyway, but you also want to add this thing. You want to see if it will work. Okay? And what you do is here's what I would do. I'm pressing Control N. I'm making a little extra sheet. This is a brand new sheet. And I'm back here. And then I click on this one. It says copy out the code, and it's copy. I call this file, the one we're looking at, file for Kenny's session, and I'm copying it to book number 5, and I press this red button, and then what it's doing is it's going through and finding all that little UDF, all that little code here. I've got to do it a couple of times, and I've got to just a second. I'm not going to waste too much time on this, but now this could be your model. This could be your model, and whoops, I screwed up something a little bit here, but this is at the last kind of 2 pages. You just stick it into your model, and then you do the links, and here's finally the big deal. I'm talking too much, my gosh. The big deal is, if you want to add a new variable, you kind of name the variable here, and then, okay, you have to go into the code. And then you have to get over any fear. And Eddie at first said, oh, this looks like some kind of modern hieroglyphic kind of language or something. No, it's just the way the whole thing works. I'm going to close this one. The way the whole thing works is it's basically put your, not the EBITDA, just the debt structuring and debt sizing. What I argue some of the really important stuff in the Excel is it puts it in mathematical terms. And I don't know what to really show you here. Just a minute. Let me do that again. And I think I'm gonna. Okay. So if you notice, it's got all these things. It says funding needs, CFADS, debt sizing, the DSRA. All of these are. Think of these as different pages of your model. I suppose we could maybe just look at this, the CFADS for a minute. And maybe this looks very intimidating to you at first, where you have, in this case, a net operating loss carry forward calculation. You compute the EBITDA, you compute the loss, and you have a CFADS. This is like a sum, a little bit of a sum function in your model. And you can add variables, you can change things around. And that's why I said it might seem like a little bit of a black box, but if you get, if you want to have a crazy life like Hetty and me, where we stay in financial modeling and we're really interested in it, you can really hopefully take your work to the next level. That's what we're hoping about this. So I've got a couple of more slides, and then I'm going to finish. Here's where we say you can see the model. Here's where we talk about adding it to your template model. And we talk about, I don't have to go through these. I think these are I've almost been through a whole lot of them. What happens if you put the changes in the DSRA into the CFADS if it's a cash DSRA? How do you do that? That's a pain in a model. Okay, what happens if you want to switch between a DSRA with a letter of credit or cash immediately? What happens if there's a balloon payment? You can put all of these things in, and this is kind of what I just showed you. And where did Mike, where did we put the, oh no, I was going to say, here's what, if you're really interested in this, here's what we want to do. We're at an early stage. Where am I? Okay, I can't find it. I had our selling points, and I can't even find it now. Okay, that doesn't matter. Okay, I might have deleted the slide. Let's say you're really interested in this, okay? And we're a startup. We're not, we're not Excel. So we'd be really excited to work with you if you have either a template model or something you have. What we would do is we take a look at it. We take a look at your structure, and it might be a case where you have something so unique that it's just, maybe it won't work. It'll just be too many changes. We'd have to kind of restructure, redo the whole thing. If maybe it's not even really project finance. That's a case I'm working on. If you want to go forward, what we want to do is we want to have some training. That's what we think. That's really what we want to get out of it. We want to explain how the mathematics for sculpting works. We'll use some simple Excel examples one by one. And then we'll show you how you can really implement it. And finally, show you with some exercises, and it'll take a little time, how we'll have an example. You want to change something. You want to add some sort of government grant and have the government grant come in between debt issue number 1 or debt issue number 2, or you want to change the funding cascade around a little. We'll show you how you can modify things or add things and have it work. And I think it's time for me to stop. And I hope somebody, it's already, I've only left 5 minutes. Taya, you're mad at me. I'm sorry.
No, I think this is really great. And we have seen there were 2 more questions that have come in. I just didn't want to interrupt you in the last 5 minutes. But let me read them out loud for you. So the first one is from Kevin, and he's asking, when UDFs are not turned off, are they constantly running in the background? Do they get turned off when switching to manual calculation?
Ooh, very, very, very good question. This is something we struggled with. We made sure that you can turn it off because it does. You don't want the UDF. Let's say you're just going into the input page and adding a bunch of lines and just setting the whole thing up or doing the linking. You don't want it running each time because it is big program and it takes a little time. So there's a way to switch it off. Number two, it only works when let's say you have the way I set this example up, I have an input that's related to the debt structuring, and then I have that Monte Carlo input. The UDF only, Mike Flynn can explain this, but the UDF only works when it pulls a variable that's affected in the UDF. So it doesn't run all the time. It only runs when you input something that actually would affect the calculation, like a debt to capital or a debt tenor. If you have some other EBITDA number that's not related, it wouldn't run. So those are two of the questions. And when you run it in manual, that's another really good question. It will, I think if you change, for example, the debt to capital ratio, I'll double check that. It's such a good question. I think it will still run. I always just leave it in a calculation mode. So those are absolutely crucial questions. You don't want this thing to just be running all the time. Thank you. Oh, wonderful question.
One more question from Kevin.
Oh, good.
And it is about the Monte Carlo simulation that you showed earlier. Is that powered by Excel VBA and UDFs only, or can it be used with another program to increase the number of simulations without crashing?
So when I do Monte Carlo simulation, I'm very old-fashioned. My Monte Carlo, that was just one. When I pressed F9, that was just one simulation. If I do 1,000 simulations, I don't use at-risk or crystal ball. I use those in the 1980s. That's when they had, in the 1980s. But now I'll just make and I try to do this efficiently. So you just don't display anything. You hold the different scenarios in memory and you just kind of print out the results. So I do that separately, but the UDF is not running, so it doesn't slow it down. And that's a whole nother wonderful subject. But the key thing is that I couldn't even imagine taking a big model and running a Monte Carlo simulation after you've done the P50 and P90. But with this, I'm selling too much in a way, but with this method, you get the debt size, you're finished, you don't rerun it anymore, and then you can do anything you want after that. Okay.
Thank you, Ed. We have a comment from Eric, who is just saying this is one refreshing presentation style while talking about financial models. So thank you for that. And one more question has just come through from Abdullah. Do you ever have clashing UDFs? Like one for debt sizing and another one for IDC?
The clashing thing, Mike, my friend Mike, who's on the phone, he's very worried. The way I use this is you have, and so it relates to your question. You have a little function that does IDC, a little function that does repayment. And then you have a kind of big do-while loop that just does all of them. And so it just goes around and around, and you can take any of these functions and put them in. And that's exactly the wonderful thing about it, because you just write these, it's Hetty's modular kind of way to do it. You put these functions in, and then you just run around it till it iterates, and you've got to be very careful about clashing variables. The different kind of different circular references where, for example, you got depreciation on the interest during construction, that then that depreciation affects the cash flow, because it affects taxes. The cash flow affects the debt size affects the IDC affects the depreciation. That's the thing that used to drive me crazy. That's all solved. Okay, very good. Oh, thank you for reading these, Tay. Oh, good. I couldn't have done this.
Oh, that's okay. I think that's it. I'm not seeing any other questions. Kevin is saying very interesting concept and he's thanking you for the answers. So that's great. I mean, we do have 1 minute left. I might just use that to tell everybody that we will be uploading the recording of this session within the next 24 to 48 hours on the platform. So in case somebody just wants to revisit some of the concepts that Ed spoke about. And yeah, I think that's it. Anything else from you, Ed, before we wrap up?
I just thank you. And I saw some people like Fazil. Is that you, Fazil? From Moscow? Is that who I think it is? Oh, it's great to, after all these years to hear from you again. What a wonderful present. Okay, thank you, Fazil. Great to
Yep, it is him.
Hear from you. Okay.
One last comment from Alex. Hi, Edward. Thanks for this. Not sure if I'm missing something, but what's the benefit other than Monte Carlo beyond speed and the fact it automatically calculates to a scenario manager tab plus macros?
The real benefit is that it works through the difficult debt sculpting mathematics, and it gets rid of all the need for a copy and paste button. So you could do any of this. There's no question, and the question was essentially right. It's speed and presentation and all that stuff, and be able to do a goal sig and all of that. You could do all of this in regular old Excel, no question. But Hetty can tell you, and maybe Hetty should close it, because working through that mathematics, for me, it's taken me years. It really has, and I've studied it. Studied hard. Multiple debt issues, sculpting, circular references with the sculpting, putting capturing debt issue in there. These are really painful things to get right, and they end up in many, many lines of code. So, Hetty, can you kind of tell a couple of your real-world experiences in using this? And then we'll close.
Sure. So, yes, I mean, I can just talk about my own experience as a user of this methodology, because I've been using it, I've been seeing Ed in action, developing this methodology all these years, and I've been applying it in my models. And I can tell you that when you're dealing with complex issues, when it comes to project finance, transaction, and structuring, you get to a point that, using your normal copy and paste is basically not working anymore. I mean, I have reached that point, that you want to push it, you really want to push it, and it doesn't, it doesn't happen. And especially when you're dealing with a lot of things at the same time, refinancing, cash sweep, debt sizing, different tenors, different interest rates. And then, running this copy and paste, you will see that, you will not be able to do it. And, adding that module into your model is, as Ed said, it's just like any other function, within your file. And this is going to recalculate things for you, and it's going to make it much easier, especially when you're presenting things, when you're live in a session, in a meeting, and people are asking you to run simulation at the same time, and running, that button and waiting for like 5 minutes. It's basically something is wrong. You see that there is something wrong. And I've been looking for an answer for years before I met Ed. And when they say that when you're looking for an answer, either you find the answer or you find someone else who has the answer. And for me, it was Ed who really, among all people, had the answer to this question. And I can tell you that I am using it in my real project. And one of my projects, I already have it. And it has been used by different stakeholders. And nobody even noticed that, there is something behind this. And but they always give me the comment that, oh, what happened to your button? The button is no longer there. And nobody's complaining.